you're doing super well and you're ready for an engaging session today with Matt Browne. I'm Rebecca, Head of Communities here at BOA, and we are thrilled to have you on this call today. I have also with me Kirsten from the BOA events team, so give everybody a wave, Kirsten. And before we get started, I'd love to share some important points. So if you could, during the call, please keep your microphones muted to minimize background noise. You are more than welcome to use the chat during the call to post any questions. We'll certainly have time at the end for a Q&A. The session will run for about 45 minutes to an hour, including that Q&A. And if you encounter any technical issues at all, please message myself or Kirsten during the call and we'll be sure to help you out. And in case you missed it, we have recently launched version 1.7.7, and this update allows you to have access to loads of communities and awesome events. So definitely check what app version you are on. We've also got a new major one coming out in the next week or two as well. Okay, so let's get ready to meet our star of the hour, Matt Browne. Matt is the managing partner at Black Nova Group and Black Nova Venture Capital, overseeing startup selection and leveraging his network for growth. Previously, he was CEO and co-founder of Donesafe, a successful EHS SaaS startup. He's also involved in Whispli and a Y-combinator alumni SaaS startup, and serves as a venture partner at Antler, mentoring numerous startups. With experience in every aspect of the startup lifecycle, Matt aims to enhance technology literacy in Australia and boost tech exports while advocating for minority inclusion, investing in Goanna solutions for Indigenous technical literacy. In the chat now, please give a warm welcome to Matt. And Matt, thank you so much for joining us today, and it is over to you.
No worries. I'll just share my screen now. Here we go. Hope that's in full screen for everybody. Thank you so much for having me today, and great to share a little bit about building and funding in 2024. And I like to say we're going to party like it's 2015 to 2019, and there's a reason for that. Obviously, 2020 and 2021 was a pretty big hype cycle for tech investing and funding globally. There was a lot of free money that entered the markets through that period, and we saw valuations hit record highs, and probably not to be repeated in definitely the near term, and quite possibly ever again. So it was very much a pretty crazy time to be fundraising. But that created also a lot of problems. People that went and fundraised through that period are now going through a bit of a capital crunch, and are often finding themselves struggling to achieve the same valuations even in their next rounds as they're continuing to build their business. So it is very much back to, if you subtract those 2 years from the last 10 years, it's very much back to the average of the last 10 years in terms of building a business, but with some really interesting tailwinds that I'll talk about today. Just as a quick disclaimer, I do run a venture capital fund. There is some things in here that are macro and in investment speak in their nature, and just because of that, I need to just show this disclaimer up front for about 30 seconds. This isn't investment advice. Anything you hear is general in nature and is purely my opinion. And so please feel free to quote me, but don't quote me as investment advice. Moving on from there, thanks very much for the introduction, Beck. Just to give you a little bit of color on my background. So I've spent the last 20 years in tech, very much an early career at Publishing and Broadcasting Limited, which was Kerry Packer's business in the early 2000s, as they started to launch a bunch of digital products when they moved away from working with 9MSN. I spent nearly 10 years transforming media, mining, manufacturing, construction, and banking industries with a number of technology products, everything from on-premise to cloud, and in the very early days of cloud transformation. I then went on to build a business called Donesafe, which over 6.5 years we scaled to 1.5 million monthly active users. I also built a business called Whispli, which went through YC, which gave me a very unique insight into how the US build companies, but also how they invest and how funding rounds happen in the US, and the unfair advantage actually that Aussie businesses have going into the US and other markets. And I'll cover some of that stuff today as well. I then decided I'd have another go during COVID and launched a new startup called Upflowy, which hit Product of the Week on Product Hunt. Backed a little over 100 startups, run a VC fund. I'm also a father of 6. And if I'm not doing all of these things, you'll find me smoking a cigar. So I have a collection of a little over 800 cigars. So if you're a cigar fan and you're ever in Sydney, I always like to share them. Cigars are a social thing. So by all means, come on by. And just a little bit about what I do. So I run the top performing pre-seed fund in Australia. So we back startups at their very earliest stage. We established in 2020 during COVID. We saw the market go crazy. We kept our head on and kept investing at fairly normal valuations through that period. And we have a focus on what we call boring is better. So enterprise software that companies buy and don't churn from. And we'll talk a little bit more about sort of what we look for as investors through this as well. If you are currently running a startup or thinking about launching a startup, or if you're thinking about investing in startups, we'll cover all of those things today. That's enough on me and what we do, just to sort of set the scene. So why Australian startups? So Australia has a really unfair advantage, and we have this advantage in quite a lot of places. You know, we're incredible inventors. You know, we've built everything from the Victor lawnmower to Wi-Fi, and you know, there's been a huge number of software businesses that have launched in the past 2 decades that have ended up becoming unicorns. And you know, have really put Australia on the map as a place to build and export technology. What has this meant? Well, it's created a really interesting flywheel for building companies. You know, we've got an incredible growing and maturing ecosystem. That ecosystem, you know, now has all of those unicorns in that ecosystem, but has, you know, we as a fund see a little over 3,500 Australian businesses a year that are launched, and so in the technology space that are looking to go out and find venture capital, and there's probably a lot more than that. That's just what we see, and you know, that comes from people that have decided to go it on their own. That's people that have been sitting in some of these fast growing businesses and have thought, you know what, I have a chance to go and do that again, do that myself. It's founders going again for the second time. And, you know, there's a number of repeat founders who are on their 3rd or 4th or 5th software company now. Availability of capital's really improved in Australia. When I started my first software business back in 2013, there were only 3 VC funds in Australia actively deploying at that time. There's now over 100 VC funds in Australia, so that the availability of capital has definitely improved. And even though it's shrunk off a little bit in the last 18 months, there's still plenty of capital there for the right businesses. Obviously, talent has continued to grow, and actually even more so at the moment. There's more talent on the market in technology than ever before, with a number of the larger companies making the choice to cut some of their headcount because they went and raised on some of those crazy valuations and are now having to grow a little bit more capital efficiently to ensure that they can actually survive and thrive. Obviously, business shifts and market shifts. We're going to talk a lot about waves of innovation today, and you know, if you think about waves of innovation in technology, you can go all the way back to sort of very early sort of mainframe supercompute through to you know, the personal computer, the mobile phone, and the internet and the mobile phone generation, the cloud computing generation, and most recently the big wave, which is obviously AI. And, you know, I think all of this leads to us having a maturity in our ecosystem that is really catching up on a per capita basis to the rest of the world. You know, 10 years ago, again, when I built my first software business, we were light years behind the United States and Israel and the UK and other places. But I think Australia has really started to show that it's a great place to build, it's a great place to invest, and it's a great place to export. So why now? I'm just going to hide this screen. There we go. So I think it's really interesting. This does have a little bit of macro investor lens to it. There are depressed valuations, and I wouldn't say a falling interest rate environment. I think there's a stabilizing interest rate environment in the United States, especially. You're seeing a real stabilization in interest rates and a likely decrease in interest rates next year. Australia is probably going to stay flat. It may have an increase or two next year because we are sitting probably at least 2% behind where we typically would be, in line with the United States, or even slightly higher interest rates than the United States. And so we may still see a little bit more movement next year. But tech valuations have fallen pretty dramatically from their highs of 2020 and early 21. This means that there are a number of opportunities there. So capital, definitely shrunk through the period, but Aussies have been building companies more capitally efficient than their international peers for a very long time. And so that creates a real opportunity for Aussie businesses to shine. And with the interest rate cycle flattening a little bit in the US and a huge amount of capital still sitting in venture funds and private equity funds in the United States, there's a lot of capital that can flow into Aussie companies if they can prove themselves here and export internationally. And so it's actually quite an interesting time from a macro point of view. Sorry. And so, to that point, there is a record amount of capital sitting in those funds, and the last 18 months they've been sitting on a lot of funds and not making a lot of investments. And so, when you think about that, if you kind of know the venture capital and private equity landscape, VCs and PEs raise money from investors, and then they deploy that money over a 10-year period, sometimes slightly longer than that, sometimes slightly less than that, but typically over a 10-year period. And so if they're sitting on a record amount of capital, they don't like to give it back because they make their money off fees. And so if they hand that money back, they have to shrink their teams, they have to rethink their business models. And so that capital has to go out the door. And what it'll be looking for is businesses that have great unit economics, that are capital efficient, that are built by founders who deeply understand the problem that they're solving, and are in a position, to go and leverage capital in a cost-effective manner and expand globally. And so a lot of that capital will start to free up. And we've already seen in the last couple of quarters, which aren't in these charts really only go to the middle of this year, but in the last couple of quarters, there's been an unfreezing of venture capital and private equity, and it's starting to look for good quality homes. And so there's actually been an uptick in deal activity in the last 2 quarters. And I think next year, while valuations will probably stay reasonably flat, there has been a slight improvement from the absolute trough. But there will be capital searching for companies and for founders that are looking at building really interesting things. And so what I like to say, and it's a shortening of Warren Buffett's quote of be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy, is that timing favors the brave. And so while founders launching companies a couple of years ago had a lot of free money in the market and valuations aplenty, and could really raise money off a pitch deck and then continue to raise money pre-revenue, people that are comfortable in building in a time where things are a little bit more adverse will typically build a better business and will be able to go and attract capital. And, I think when you look at themes, we're currently sitting at the start of a new wave of technology disruption. We're going to talk quite a bit about AI, but also some of the macro themes that we'll see over the next decade and where the winners and losers will come from. And a downturn will inevitably create a number of opportunities for startups who are willing to fight through these phases, will find enterprise customers, and will be able to, marketing, for example, marketing dollars alone, you had to spend a hell of a lot to win in marketing over the last couple of years. But as people retract from marketing spend, those who are willing to go and spend on marketing may find some really good wins through that period. History's proven the best startups are created in times of uncertainty. If you go back to the GFC, businesses like Airbnb and Dropbox and others that are now unicorns today were created during those periods. And typically businesses that are created when capital markets are tighter, as capital markets open up, they're usually the winners of that new capital entering markets. And so we expect to see an increased number of people demonstrate resilience and build some fantastic companies through this period. And I think, this new macro environment we're in, whether you look at everything from AI to momentum in ESG and governance tailwinds and a number of other things, it's going to generate some really new opportunities as we rethink the way that we work and the way that we play as a civilization. So looking at AI specifically, there's a lot of fear in the AI hype cycle at the moment. There's definitely plenty of greed. And there really is a two-speed economy for companies that are raising at the moment. Those that are AI native and those that either haven't adopted AI or have adopted AI in a light way. AI, isn't necessarily an existential threat to civilization. I don't really lean in that camp. I don't think that we're going to face Skynet or robots taking over, but it is going to create probably as big a shift in the way that we work and the way that we do things as the Industrial Revolution did, or as the first wave of internet did for companies. And so, that is going to create both a huge number of opportunities and threats for existing businesses and new businesses launching through that period. There's going to be a huge amount of workforce displacement and change. Who would have thought 9 to 12 months ago that there might be a risk for content writers and that content writing might only might shrink as a profession by 80 to 90%, and it will be really relative to creativity and to sort of more senior persons working with AI to generate high quality content. I was out with a rapper the other day who just invested in a new AI startup out of the US, which is automatically generating live sports news with high quality video presenters that rivals ESPN and Fox Sports and others, and is growing incredibly rapidly. That's a bunch of presenter jobs and a bunch of news writer jobs that could potentially be at risk with that form of news media. If you're sitting in the legal profession, the need to draft and proof contracts will probably likely be something that maybe not entirely disappears, but the level of work that's needed by humans is probably going to reduce by 80 to 90%. So there's going to be a huge number of jobs that are deeply impacted. But I think with every revolution, whether it be the Industrial Revolution or the wave of the internet or the personal computer, there are a bunch of new jobs that were created. I remember a decade ago, the idea of there being a social media manager, that was a career that probably nobody was thinking a decade earlier. And so there'll be a bunch of new jobs that will be created with AI, and a bunch of new companies and opportunities will be created. And we're going to talk about some of those themes more broadly in the next slide. But this will really create, as I mentioned, a two-speed economy. And I use the word SaaS because that's where I specialize, but it will create a two-speed economy. It will be very much those who adopt and embrace AI and join the early and standard adoption curves. Remember, AI is very much a bell curve. We're still sitting in the early adopter phase. We'll move into general public perception, and then you'll have your late stragglers and adopters towards the end. Those who fail to adopt will more than likely cease to exist, will dramatically slow down, or will retract in size as companies over the next decade. And those who do embrace it, either those who are lucky enough to be sitting on an unfair amount of data and who decide to get involved early and can generate the next versions of the products, or those who can collect data in an unfair way and then generate products, will build some of the biggest companies we'll see over the next decade. And so when we think about some of the macro factor prisms to view the next decade in, it's not all about AI. There are a huge number of tailwinds and headwinds to be across as you're thinking about building a business, whether you're thinking about the business that you're building right now, or whether you're thinking about the next business that you want to build, or if you're thinking about what sort of businesses I may want to invest in. So all of these things exist today and are accelerating rapidly. We've got the energy transition, corporate net zero targets, the rise of electronic vehicles, massive infrastructure investment, hydrogen, potential fusion. Energy is going to completely transform over the next 10 years. And, there will be businesses that will ride this transition. There will be businesses that create, entirely new ways of consuming, entirely new ways of managing, governing, operating. And there will be consumers that will need to consume these things and will become the driving force of a number of these businesses. There's also a huge amount of movement in the overall social impact or social consciousness of society. And so, whether you think about, the movement in kind of human trends around, being woke or not woke, whether you think about things, around the ways of ESG and, how we think about, the environment, how we think about governance, how we think about social responsibility. Supply chains took an absolute hammering during COVID, and they're only just starting to unblock or just unblocking properly now. There's going to be a huge amount of supply chain transparency, modern slavery, child workers. These sorts of things are obviously have always existed in certain businesses, but are now, quite part of people's perception and people's, personal sort of interest areas of wanting to see these things disappear over the next decade. And so supply chain transparency becomes a big thing. And there's also some incredible aggressive shifts in global legislation, not just globalization of legislation, but also now right-shoring of domestic legislation. And so these things can be massive tailwinds and headwinds. So when you think about so my second software business, Whispli, was very fortunate to launch with a bunch of these tailwinds. So we had a number of big frauds like Unaoil, the Theranos scandal. We had the Harvey Weinstein arrest and then incarceration and the Me Too movement. We had a number of legislative changes that happened in supply chain and happened in whistleblowing, which led my whistleblowing software business to become profitable from year 2 and grow to 300 enterprises over the last 6 and a bit years. So these are the sorts of factors that as business owners and investors, we can look at and identify where the trends are going and where we may want to move our existing business or where we may want to consider starting a new business. There's rapidly reducing fertility rates and an aging population. And so you're starting to see, obviously with the young population not growing as quickly and the aging population living for longer, there's a huge number of opportunities that obviously come out of that. And I think AI is really exciting in this area. If we have less people entering the workforce, more people, being alive for longer, how can AI support that particular movement? But then what goods and services are required to support an ever-aging population? You'd be living under a rock if you haven't seen the constant cybersecurity attacks that are impacting businesses every day. And this is really creating a cybersecurity arms race, both at a government level and at a business level, even at a personal level. Just today, my wife called me actually just before this call, and she was hit with a pretty, she thankfully called me to say whether she should reply to this or not, but, a pretty sophisticated ATO scam. So as individuals, we're constantly, inundated with scams. I'd hate to count the number of scams that hit my inbox on a weekly basis, and I'm sure you're all the same. And this is obviously the same for businesses. Businesses are constantly, through a combination of brute force attacks and individual, trying to find weakness in human systems, in humans' ability to decipher whether something's a scam or not, and then potentially go into a ransomware battle, or a code leak, or a number of other areas. And so I was over in Las Vegas back in September when MGM was hit with their big cybersecurity attack that came out of a ransomware attack initially. I couldn't open the door to my hotel room. I couldn't go downstairs and interact with some of the casino games. And so that was a massive loss of reputation and also a massive loss of revenue for MGM Group through that period. So I think businesses will be thinking about how do they right-size cybersecurity for their organization? How do they do more than tick the box? Because ticking the box isn't good enough in cybersecurity anymore. And so a ton of opportunities will arise in cybersecurity. Obviously, the intersection of health and data. So, right now, when you attend your doctor, I know when I attend my doctor, he's still sort of single finger keying things into his computer and printing off a paper script. But you can see a ton of movement in health and the combination of data to provide better health outcomes. We recently saw a large language model, an AI play, which was able to better than doctor and better than any other system on the market today, look at the intersection of drugs, your medical history, and your current challenges that you're facing, and spit out, up to a 99.2% accuracy, a relative diagnoses and a treatment plan. And so you start to look at that and you go, well, does that mean that GPs become irrelevant over the next decade? Does that mean that pharmacists could start to offer this advice, for example? So a huge amount of movement in health and data. I've talked about supply chain a little bit, but that includes energy security, food security. There's an absolute fight for minerals and materials processing, and you'll start to see a lot more advanced manufacturing. So again, lots of opportunities there. I've talked about the workforce transition due to AI, and so I'll leave that. You would have probably seen Apple release its new headset, immersive augmented reality. Metaverse was a flavor a couple of years ago, but is coming back strong again. The ability to plug in wearables or insertables to utilize your body to work with interfaces. The way that we interact with the world and with technology is likely to change pretty heavily over the next 10 years. And so what does that mean for the mobile phone? What does that mean for the computer? What does that mean for interfaces? What does that mean for the ways we work? Data production is increasing exponentially. It's interesting. I caught up with somebody who runs a decentralized data storage business the other day, and he believes by the end of this decade, we will not have the storage to store more than 5% of all data created. So there's going to be an arms race for storage and for novel ways of identifying what data should be kept and what data should be deleted. And of course, we share this world with billions of people. And outside of energy, there's also plastics, recycling, circular economy. How do we do more with less? How do we reuse the things we have? How do we invent new things that don't harm the environment? Alternatives to plastics, for example. So as the world goes through, not just one, but many seismic transformations, there's a lot of threats for existing businesses, but there's a hell of a lot of opportunities for people that are thinking about businesses today. And so I like to think it all comes down to three things when you're thinking about building a business, when you're thinking about investing in a business, or when you're thinking about the team you have today. It really comes down to people that are willing to move heaven and earth to build, and will hit every wall and will continue to hit every wall, and have the right capabilities and team harmony to go the distance. I think the day of vitamin products is really dying. There's a lot of fatigue in the market around marketing, around cloud, around subscription services. I hate to think about the number of personal subscriptions and business subscriptions I have for things that aren't acute and persistent and aren't necessarily novel. So, when you're thinking about investing or when you're thinking about building, ensuring you're building a novel solution that solves an acute and persistent problem. And I think, right now more than ever, Aussies have got a platform to build products that target global customers. Australia is an incredibly small market. It's a great test market, but if you want to build something that really becomes export grade and becomes big and attracts venture capital and investment, you need to go global, and you need to go global earlier. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you should pick up your bags and move to the United States, and the US might not even be the most logical market. We sit, with a great proximity to Asia. We have great relationships and great heritage with the United Kingdom. It's about identifying where the next market is that has, another large group of customers that you can attract, and going global earlier will help you to de-risk your business, but also help you to find capital. Other things to consider, I think this is very much founder-driven rather than investor-driven. I like to say that founders have 3 runways that you can allocate: your equity runway, your cash flow runway. So your equity runway is the amount of your company that you have left, and every time you take investment, you dilute a little bit more, and so you have less equity to kind of keep you going, which obviously impacts your outcome, although it's better to be a small piece of a big pie than a big piece of a small pie. Your cash flow runway, how much money do I have in the bank? How much money is coming in and how much money is coming out? But the one that a lot of founders don't think about is your Y runway. And this is the runway I actually think is the most important, because your Y runway is your reason for getting out of bed in the morning and continuing to build a business when everything's hard. And that's when you've given up too much equity or there isn't enough cash in the bank to pay the bills. The Y runway is the one that will keep you going through all periods of adversity. And then when you think about why, then it's also the why runway for your business. It's why you. Why are you the right founder to go out and solve one of those macro trends I talked about previously? Are you a domain expert? Have you experienced the problem yourself? Have you got an unfair advantage in finding people to get on board with the thing that you're doing, or an unfair network in the space you're looking to play? Why now? If you're looking to build a law firm from scratch today and you're not going to embed AI, then probably today's not the day to launch that new law firm. But if you're looking at building a business that's going to consume legal advice and generate contracts using AI, maybe now's the perfect time to be doing that. And then why this? Why is this the problem? Why is this the solution that's going to solve a big enough problem for enough people? And if you can answer all of those questions, and it's the sort of thing that makes you get out of bed in the morning and want to do it every day, then you probably should start or keep going. We've talked about markets, but which markets? As I said, Australia is a small market. If I could go back in time, I probably would have gone to the US earlier than I did. I waited quite a few years before I jumped on a plane and went into the US, and the US ended up being more than half of my market. With my second business, Europe was the logical market because of legislative changes. There was a lot of legislative tailwinds for what we were doing. And so, going and setting up a headquarters in Paris made more sense than spending our money in the US or Australia. And so that's why that second business, 70% of the team are over in Paris. And then I think the other thing today, it's very hard to start a business without thinking about what impact you're going to have, because shareholders care, investors care, your team will care, your employees will care, society cares. And so, what legacy do you want to leave? What impact do you want to have? What's your mandate to make the world a better place in the thing that you're building? I think that's also another thing to be considering. So, look, I hope that gives you a bit of food for thought. I'm happy to take any questions, so I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you so much, Matt. Shannon's asked a question. Shannon, do you want to come on and ask yourself, or are you happy for me?
Sure, I'll jump in. But
yeah, go for it.
Quick one for you, Matt. You spoke about tech, you spoke about software, you spoke about product to market fit. From a VC investor perspective, looking at hardware, noting that deep tech is long, it's difficult, and hardware is called hard for a reason. If you're doing DD on a hardware company, what are you looking for from an investor perspective?
Yeah, so hardware, look, and definitely my lens is more software, although I do some personal hardware investing as well. I'm an investor in espresso displays. I definitely like hardware as a space, but it is incredibly hard, to your point. It's very capital intensive. It doesn't happen as quickly as software. I think what we typically look for is, does the team have the capability to build what they need to build, prove out what they need to prove out, and get access or lock down IP? I think IP becomes a lot more important in hardware than it does in software. We look to understand what the supply chain looks like for what you're building. Does it exist today? Do you have access to it? Can you lock down an unfair advantage in supply chain? Can you optimize costs to ensure that you can actually get a reasonable margin on the hardware you're producing? If it does require a huge amount of R&D, where does that R&D come from? Are there partnerships you can do with universities? Are there partnerships you can do with enterprises or corporates to unlock, additional capital outside of dilutive capital to help extend the runway, because it's expensive and it's time consuming. But, I think Australia, a lot of funds in Australia are scared of hardware. Our second fund is definitely going to do more hardware than we did in our first fund. And so, we're trying to be more open to it, but it is a long journey. And so I think it's just ensuring you have those ingredients before you go and talk to investors.
Excellent. Thank you.
No worries.
Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask Matt?
Yeah, sorry. Hi, I'm Gary. Matt, sorry, I missed the start of the presentation. And you may have covered this, but in terms of your company, do you guys have any? I mean, I'm in software, but do you guys have any experience in the US, specifically in the retail?
In retail, so is it retail in terms of a retail organization buying your software, or in terms of retail consumer?
Consumer. So we're a B2B in the retail sector. So we're not supply chain tech, but we do planning, forecasting, allocation, replenishment, ranging. So retail in fashion, footwear, jewelry, accessories. We've got a pretty decent sized presence in Australia. We've got a North American office based in Toronto, R&D's in Toronto. That's where the IP's held. But the problem we've had is we haven't really made enough moves in North America, and we're in between whether we go self-funding, getting VC, making sure that we don't over-dilute, and then also we lose a level of control. So kind of wanted to see whether we go and find a VC in the US, or if it's best to chat to someone like yourself.
I think if you haven't got customers in the US already, it's hard to potentially get a US investor on board. Typically, we've got a really large one, but that's our Achilles heel at the same time, because they've chewed up a lot of resource. So and you have concentration risk. Yeah, look, I think, yes, I do. So my first software business, our second largest category of customer was retailers. So I've sold into everyone in the US, from Home Depot to McDonald's to a lot of food and beverage, a lot of large box retail, not necessarily kind of smaller retailers. So I'd be happy to catch up with you outside of this and chat more specifically on that experience. And on the fundraising side, I'm also happy to connect you with people that are in the US that invest in that space.
Brilliant. No, that'd be great.
No worries.
Awesome. Do we have any last questions for
Rebecca, if you don't mind?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, hi. I'm Andrew Tiernan. I've got a company called Pathways, which is a reg tech business. Matt, one of the things, I had this actually down as a question until you put your last slide up, when you talked about why and impact.
Yeah.
Because when you do your first bootstrapping, and then you transition to family and friends, and then you get to that tipping point where you're just starting to get customers, you're just starting to see probably the right revenue path. You're not sure you've got the right playbook yet, but that's kind of when impact and the why comes in, with that uncertainty. So from a funding perspective, what is the tipping point between saying, okay, another round of family and friends, or just doubling down and bootstrapping even more to get more customers, or or when the oxygen's getting really thin, at what point do you put your hand up and go look for help?
I think it really depends on what outcome you're seeking for your business. So, like, if you're trying to build something that you want to be really big and you're in it for the really long term, momentum becomes incredibly important in unlocking VC. So, VCs really look at kind of two things outside of team and timing and the idea and the market, which is kind of more just holistic as to whether it's an investment they'd look at. It's what is your momentum and how efficiently are you gaining that momentum? And so efficiency has become as important as momentum, if not more important as momentum, in the last couple of years. In 2020, 2021, it was very much momentum. People were backing up the truck for businesses with good momentum. But I think momentum and capital efficiency are really important things to be focusing on. So if you want to build something really big, you're already seeing early signs of momentum. You believe you've got something that is somewhat repeatable. That's a great time to take on capital, and it really depends on the stage you're at as well. If you're early, we're a pre-seed seed fund, so we back people pre to early revenue. So it's about working with the right type of fund for the stage of your business and ensuring that fund is able to back you for a period of time. They're not just a one and done fund. One of the challenges with VC is if you take investment from VC and they don't have capital to keep backing you, and you hit a snag, then you've probably found the wrong first VC.
Yep, fair. Thanks.
No worries.
Nick, I saw you turn your camera on. Did you have a question? You're muted.
Hey, Matt. How's it going?
Hey, Nick. Good, mate. How are you?
Good. Just similar to Gary, but slightly different. So, as you know, we're starting to grow a lot of momentum in Australia, and we've still got a massive market here that we can hit. At what point would you suggest we do start looking global? Because we haven't at all at the moment. There's such a big market here, you'd say we'd lose focus here. But is it still something we need to look at when we talk about further investments and that sort of thing?
Yeah, look, I think, and I know your business, so I'm going to try to give an answer that lets other people into more than me knowing your business. I think one, going overseas before you're ready can be very expensive. And so if you're already having wins in the market you're in, you don't want to lose that momentum. And so you kind of want to think about it. I like McKinsey's 3 horizons, if you've seen that before, where you kind of spend 70% in the thing that you're doing, 20% in the next thing, and 10% in the thing that will eventually become the thing. And so I think, when I first tried to launch in the US with my first software business, and we were a bootstrap business. We raised a tiny amount of capital and then never raised again. We basically ran off our own profits. And so we were very, focused on where our dollars went. And so, for us, when Australia was kind of humming, we first tried to do the US in a big way, and it was a terrible idea, and we burned a lot of time and energy. And what we then decided was, well, looking at our groupings of customers, where's a city or a state that has a really good grouping of those same sorts of customers? And so we just hit that city and state and treated that as the stepping stone to kind of expanding out from there. I think when you enter a new market, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by just the sheer size of the market. And so you really want to, as you think about eating an elephant one bite at a time, I think, with your business, knowing that the space you play in that kind of hospitality space, sort of Texas and probably Dallas, Texas is a great place to start because it has a concentration of hospitality headquarters, for example. And so it's like, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to target that market. I'm going to go spend 6 months on the ground there, and I'm going to hire 1 or 2 people to leave there, and that's my investment. Now, I think that's a pragmatic way to do it when you're thinking about being capital efficient. If you're fortunate enough to have access to a lot of capital, you might try 3 or 4 of those experiments at once, but knowing that every experiment you do will consume founding team time and will slow things down in your home market no matter how much you try.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Okay, well, we might start to wrap up. So thank you so much, Matt. That was like truly wonderful, and you had some awesome questions at the end there. And a big massive thank you to everyone for attending today. Make sure you connect with Matt on the app. Make sure you join his startup community as well. He's the leader in there, and you can also connect with him at blacknova.vc. And to see more of our events, head to the events icon on the app. And also for community-based events, you'll find these inside your industry or local-based communities. We'll be sending a short email after this asking for feedback, so please be sure to share with us what you'd like to see in the future. And thank you again, Matt. We look forward to seeing you all again next time. And if we don't get to connect with you before the end of the year, have a happy and safe Christmas and a prosperous 2024. So we will be in touch with you soon. See you later, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matt. That was wonderful.
Thank you.